welcomes you to a true story of a courageous mother guiding her 4 children through war-torn Europe in search of her husband. Let's join Dr. Kay Kuzma now as she tells us the first part of this amazing true story entitled Lemonade, the Escape from Poland.
I'm going to tell you a story about Kim, Kari, and Kevin's grandfather and about their daddy and what happened a number of years ago as they tried to escape from Poland. And I call this story Lemonade. But you're not going to know why the story is called Lemonade until the very end, and then I'm going to ask you to see if you know why the story is called Lemonade. The story starts out with William. Now, he's a young man, and he wants to know a lot more about God. He lives in a country called Poland, and they worship God, but it's always the priests in the church that talk about God and have Bibles. And he wants to have a Bible so badly that one night as he's praying to God, he has a dream. And the dream is about this man who sells books. And he comes to the door and he has a briefcase full of Bibles. Well, William woke up and was excited because he felt that that was an answer to his prayer. That if he could just find the man who sold books to open his briefcase, why, he could have a Bible. He could buy a Bible. And he wanted one so badly. And one day he was over at his friend's house. And a book salesman came to the door and knocked. And the friend wasn't interested. No, I'm sorry, I don't want any books. But William recognized that man. He was the man in the dream. And as soon as the door shut and the book salesman started away, William said goodbye to his friend and headed off down the street after the book salesman. And he came up to the man and he said, "Sir, do you happen to have any Bibles in your briefcase?" And the man said, "Well, yes, I've got lots of Bibles." And he opened up his briefcase and showed William all the Bibles and all the other books. And William bought them all and took them home. That's the kind of a man every book salesman loves to meet. That'll take the whole briefcase, or everything in it except the briefcase. And William went home, downstairs to his little bedroom, and began reading all these books. And he came across things that he never knew before. Things like, the 7th day is the Sabbath? He couldn't believe it. But he went back and he found the book salesman and he said, "Prove to me out of the Bible the 7th day is the Sabbath." And the man showed him right out of the Bible that the 7th day was the Sabbath. It says there, right in Exodus 20. It's one of the commandments. And suddenly William's eyes were opened and he said, "Yes, I want to worship God on the 7th day. But where can you find people that worship God on the 7th day?" And the book salesman told him, and William became a Seventh-day Adventist. And he had a dream just about that time that he had a basket. And in the basket he had lots of bread. And he was breaking the bread and feeding all the people. And when he woke up from that dream, he said, "I believe God is calling me to be a book salesman and to share the things that I have learned with others." Now, William's mom and dad didn't really think this was a good idea, that William should become a Seventh-day Adventist. Why was William leaving their religion? Why, in their religion, if a son or a daughter left and went to any other denomination or any other church to worship, it was better that they should die and be dead and gone and buried rather than to go and worship in any other church. William's mother was a very, very religious woman. And she was so concerned because William was going not the way of her church, but a different way, and he had become a Seventh-day Adventist. And she kept saying, "It is better if William were dead. It is better if William were dead." And she was so distraught that one day she decided what she needed to do. It was her responsibility. If she had raised a son that would reject his church and keep the seventh-day Sabbath and go with this little tiny church, it was her responsibility to kill her son. Well, William had no idea what was in his mother's mind. And one day, when he was sleeping in the afternoon because he was up late selling books, he was downstairs in his little room. His mother said, "This is the time." So she got a knife out of the kitchen and started down the stairs. And about halfway down the stairs, suddenly there was a noise upstairs. And somebody was calling, "Yoo-hoo, Mary, yoo-hoo, are you around?" It was her sister. Quickly, she put the knife behind her, and she looked so startled when her sister saw her that the sister said, "What are you doing?" And the mother said, I just felt impressed that it was my responsibility to kill William. And the sister said, "That's terrible. You shouldn't do that." And she began to talk some sense into this mother. And Mom put away the knife. But when William heard the story, he knew it was no longer safe to stay home. And so he moved out and full-time started selling books, door to door. And he would go and everybody that was interested, he would get in a little group and he would study the Bible with them. And when they would want to be baptized, he would call in a minister and they would come and baptize everybody. And pretty soon little churches started here and little churches started there. And one day, William went to the door in this new town that he had never been before, and he said something about the books he was selling. And the man at the door said, "Listen, Mr. Kuzma, there is a Sunday school teacher here who is a really good Sunday school teacher. And if you can convince this Sunday school teacher that all this stuff you're telling me is true, then we'll listen to you." And William said, "Well, I know I can convince anyone that it's true. It's right here in the Bible." "Oh, but you don't know Elizabeth. Elizabeth knows the Bible backwards and forwards." So a meeting was arranged for William and Elizabeth to talk about the Bible. And William presented something, and Elizabeth said, "Oh, that's not right." And so William would say, "Well, find in the Bible where this Sabbath isn't right." And Elizabeth would go and look here, and then she would look there, and she said, "I know it's not right." And she looked all over, and she couldn't find any way to prove her point. And pretty soon, Elizabeth was convinced that William had the Bible truth, and the books that he had were the truth. And so Elizabeth became a Seventh-day Adventist, and so did a number of people in that town. And pretty soon, William thought Elizabeth looked like a pretty nice girl. And Elizabeth thought William looked like a mighty handsome man. And they decided to get married. And they had 4 children. The oldest one was Donna. And then 2 years later came Christine. And then a couple years later came Jan, which is Kim, Kari, and Kevin's daddy. And he wasn't called Jan when he was a kid. His real name was Jan. But when he came to this country, they looked at Jan and they said, "Well, we know how to pronounce that. That's Jan." So everybody calls him Jan now. But it was Jan. And for short, a nickname, they called him Janek. Like we have John and Johnny. Well, it was Jan and Janek back there in Poland. And then, about 8 years later, came the caboose of the family, little baby George. And the family went from place to place as Mommy and Daddy would sell books, and sometimes there was terrible persecution. people didn't like them sometimes in their city because they were telling things that the rest of the people didn't believe. And so they would take rocks, and at night they would throw it through the bedroom window. And sometimes these rocks came very close to hitting the kids in their bed. And it wasn't always a pleasant situation. But at least Mommy and Daddy were busy every single day sharing the gospel. And Daddy came home with such exciting stories. Why, one time he came home and he said, "Kids, you will not believe what happened to me today. I was in this certain town, and all the church leaders got together, and they decided they didn't want me in this town any longer. And so they got clubs and sticks and started to chase me out of town. I was frightened. I grabbed my briefcase and started to run, but the mob was right behind me, and I ran as fast as I could, and suddenly there was a great big hole, and I tripped and fell right down in that hole. I was desperate to get out. I was only just a few seconds ahead of these people, and I tried to scramble out of that hole, and I worked, and I worked, and I worked, and I couldn't get out of that hole. And pretty soon I realized that the people had run right past me. They didn't even realize I was down in that hole. And pretty soon it was quiet. And I tried once again to climb out of the hole. That time, no sweat. Boy, I just climbed out of that hole, and nobody was around, so I took my briefcase, and here I am home. And day after day, Daddy would come home and tell the kids about the miracles that God performed for him as he was out selling these books, talking about the importance of the Sabbath and the beautiful things in Scripture and sharing these with the people. Then, one day, when Jan was 8 years old, something happened in that country. The Nazi army forcefully marched through Poland and in just a few days captured the whole country. And suddenly, the German army was in control of Poland. The Nazis would not let anybody worship anything. Why, it was illegal now to go to a church service. It was illegal to be caught preaching. It was illegal to sell books. And when the family wanted to go to church, they couldn't go to a church building. What they had to do is take some flowers or a present as if they were going to a birthday party. And then they would come to the house where they were going to have Sabbath school and church. And they would look both ways to see if anybody was watching. And if nobody was around, then they would go up to the door and knock. And when somebody would open the door, they would say, "Happy birthday!" and hand them the present and go in, just in case somebody was listening. It was so dangerous to have religious meetings at that time that they could not even sing because somebody might hear the singing and report them. And oh boy, if you got reported to the Nazis, you might be shipped out on the next train to a concentration camp, and nobody wanted that to happen. So they would quietly open up the hymn books, and instead of singing, they would read the words of the song. And then, later on, the war went on. The German army had marched up into Russia, and things began to get a little difficult. The Germans needed every able-bodied person they could get to work in the war effort because so many people were getting killed. And so one day, they came to Yannick's house, and the authorities said that tomorrow they're coming to take their father off to a labor camp. Even though he was Polish, he was going to have to work for the German army. Chen remembers that day as they all gathered together and had a family picture, but he didn't really know what was happening. He was only 8, and the folks didn't tell him too much about the war. They got the family picture taken, and the next day their father was taken away. And they didn't tell the family where he had gone, where he was going to be working. They just knew he had gone off to a forced labor camp. That's like you're almost a slave, forced to work for the army. Weeks went by. Well, during the war, Jan's father could no longer sell books. So while he was home, he went back to his old business, which was a shoe manufacturing business. And he made shoes. Now, when he had to go off to the army, who was going to take over the factory? Well, Elizabeth's mom decided she was going to have to run the business. And she was a good businesswoman. She knew how to make money. And she knew how to influence people. And when the German army officials would come and say, now, we need 100 army boots by Friday, she would say, oh, sir, to these big army officials, the people that were in charge now of the country, who were enemies. She had the strength to say, sir, we couldn't possibly meet that order. Why can't you meet the order? Because, she said, you have taken so many of the Jewish families away to, it was a holding area before the trains came to take them away to concentration camps. You have so many of these people on your list to take away that our families are so sad they couldn't possibly work. We can't get those shoes done for you because everybody is so sad. But maybe we could get that order out if you could take these people off your list. Give me the list. And the officials would look at the list. And because they wanted those army boots so badly, time after time after time, Elizabeth Kuzma was able to free many, many of those Jewish families so they didn't have to go to the concentration camps. And life got worse and worse. And they never heard from Daddy, but she was a good businesswoman. Until one day, the dogs began howling. And everybody wondered why the dogs were howling. And then a number of hours later, they began to hear the artillery shots. The war front was coming close. Suddenly word spread through the city. The Russian army is pushing the German army back through Germany. It's no longer safe to stay in this city. You must leave immediately. And they painted such a terrible picture of that barbarian army. They told about how awful those Russians were, those terrible barbarian soldiers, and how if they wanted the ring on your finger, and if they couldn't pull it off, why, they knew of soldiers who would just bite off the finger or cut off the finger in order to get the ring. And if you had a tooth that was filled with gold, and they wanted that gold, why, they thought nothing of taking a rock and knocking out your tooth and taking the gold. And what they did to women and children, why, it was so awful. Nobody even talked about it. It was so awful. No way would they leave anybody behind for this Russian army, which was pushing the German army back through Poland. No way would they leave anybody behind for those barbarians. What they really didn't say is they didn't want anybody left behind who was still favorable to the Polish-Russian army that was pushing the Germans back through Poland, because then they would help the army if they were left behind, and they weren't going to leave anybody behind. So they made it absolutely mandatory that everybody had to leave town. Well, said Elizabeth, how long before we have to leave? Oh, they said, the train is leaving in a couple of hours. What should we pack? Oh, don't worry about packing anything. Why, this is just a temporary setback. In a few days, we will have pushed those Russians back where they belong, and you can go back to your town or back to your home. So, Mommy and the 4 kids, they packed up a few suitcases, and just as if they were kind of going on a picnic, and headed off to the train station. And it was kind of fun, going someplace new, and why, they'd be back in just a day or so, and they got on the train and went down away from the war front to another city. But in just a couple days, again, the loudspeakers came through the city. The kids had heard the dogs barking before, and pretty soon they heard the artillery shots, and now the announcement that the war front was pushing down to that city. Again, they would have to get on the train and leave. Everybody packed quickly. The whole town, all the other people that had crowded into that town from Putsk, where the kids started out, everybody ran for the train depot. Nobody wanted to get left behind for this terrible, awful army that was pushing the Germans back through Poland. And Jan's mother suddenly stopped, and she said, I have an impression. I just have a feeling that we shouldn't get on that train. Oh, Mom! You must be joking! What do you mean not get on the train? That's the only way to safety. Why, what if those awful Russian soldiers would come into town? Think what they might do to us. Please, Mom, you've got to get on that train. And once again, Mom said, I just have a feeling we shouldn't get on that train. So everybody else got on that train and left town. Except Mommy and Donna, Christine, Yannick, and little baby George. The town was quiet. There was no one around. Everybody was gone. And then Mommy said, I have a feeling right now that we should leave town. But Mom, how are we going to leave town? And tomorrow I'll tell you what happened.
Lemonade, The Escape from Poland. This is part 2, entitled A Mother's Sacrifice. And once again, here is Dr. K. Kuzma.
The story started out with Yannick's daddy, William, and the family, then William met Elizabeth, and they had 4 children. Now, who can remember the 4 children's names? Now, that's going to be hard, because we haven't used all the names. Can you remember? The oldest daughter was Donna. Very good. And the next one down was Christine. Oh, you kids listen so beautifully. And then came Yannick. And finally, 8 years later, there was baby George. And they were living in Putsk, Poland, when suddenly, or one day, they heard the dogs start barking. And what was happening when they heard the dogs start barking? What were the dogs hearing that the people couldn't hear? The artillery shots. They were hearing those high sounds. And then word came that they had to leave town. So Mom thought they were just leaving like for a picnic, headed off to the train station, down to another town, and they stayed there for just a few days, and then what happened again? They said they had to leave again, right? And What was the army that was pushing the German army back through Poland? The Russian army was pushing the German army. Oh, you kids listen so well. And what is the name of the story? Oh, you even know that. Incredible. Okay. So here we have the word spread now in this other little city where they were, that everybody in the whole city must get on the train again and leave. And so everybody was grabbing their suitcases and running toward the train because they knew if they didn't get on the train that the terrible Russian army was pushing the German army back through Poland and it would catch up to this town. And if anybody was left behind, they told terrible, awful, horrible, terrible stories about what those barbarian soldiers would do to people if they wanted gold. Remember all those awful things? And the kids were scared and they were running to the train and suddenly Mommy said what? What did Mommy say? I don't think we should get on the train. Now how many thinks that's really a smart idea? To stay behind when everybody else gets on the train. It doesn't sound like a very smart idea, really, does it? Well, today you'll find out if it was a smart idea or not. So there's Mommy, and Donna, and Christine, and Yannick, and baby George standing beside the highway. And they see the train leaving town. Everybody in the whole town is on that train. And there they are. They chose not to go on that train. And after the train pulls out of town, Mommy says, now what does she say? I think we ought to leave town. And the kids say, Mom, but the train just left. The only way out of town. It's gone. Why didn't you decide that half an hour earlier so we could have gotten on the train? Well, said Mother, I just didn't feel like we should get on that train. I just had this impression that we shouldn't get on the train. Well, said the kids, what are we going to do now? Everybody has left and we're all alone. And those terrible Russian soldiers are pushing the German soldiers back. Mother, we're scared. So Mom said, well, why don't we just stand here next to the highway and just see if anybody comes by and maybe they can take us to safety. And they stood there for a while, and there in the distance, there was a Jeep, and then another Jeep, and another Jeep. It was a caravan of German officers who were trying to escape before the war front. As the war front was being pushed down, they were trying to get out of the way because they didn't want to be captured by those horrible, awful Russian soldiers. And so the first Jeep went by, and the kids were hoping maybe we can catch a ride. But the first Jeep was filled to capacity. There were so many people crowded in the Jeep. These German soldiers didn't want to get caught, and so they were heading off. And the next Jeep went by, and that Jeep was full too. And the next one, but that one was full too. And every Jeep was full, overcrowded with people. Now the kids said, what are we going to do? And Mommy said, let's keep praying. God has a way to help us. He will never leave us. Let's just pray. And they began praying and watching all that caravan of Jeeps go by. And finally, they saw the last Jeep of the caravan. And as it came closer and closer and closer, suddenly they realized there was nobody sitting in the back seat of that Jeep. And they got out on the road and they waved their hands, and the officer that was in that Jeep, driving that Jeep, he stopped and he said yes, they could get in. And they piled in that Jeep with all their things and headed off to safety. They went on down the road with the caravan, and finally they stopped at another town. And this seemed like it was far enough away from the war front. No way would the war front come into this town. So Mother thanked the man that had taken them, and they got out in a strange place, having no idea where to go. everybody was kind of in chaos in this city because so many people from the war front had come into the city trying to find places to stay, and others had left. It was just, it wasn't an organized community now, and there were empty houses, and because some of the people were scared to stay around and they had left. So, Jan's mother decided that they would go into a basement area of an apartment and stay. But the refrigerator for the apartment house was up above, and they kept all of their food up there. But at night it wasn't safe to be up above, because if any of the soldiers around would see those lights up there, they might shoot at them. And so every night they would go down into the basement, and day after day after day went by like that. Then one day, the dogs started howling again. What did that mean? The artillery shots were in the distance, but the people couldn't hear it yet. And pretty soon they could hear the shots. The war front was moving closer and closer to this city. How could it be? They thought they were safe, and once again it was coming to them. This time, instead of the officials of the town saying everybody must get on the train and leave, they said, now you have a choice. They realized that pretty soon the army was just going to catch up, and it was probably not, they couldn't move everybody in the whole country. And so they said, whoever wants to can get on the train and leave town. Well, the interesting thing is, they heard that the train that Mother didn't take, that everybody else in that whole other town took, that train was bombed, and almost everybody was killed on that train. But for some reason, Jesus impressed that mother to not go on that train, even though it seemed like the right thing to do. Don't go on that train. Now the children were anxiously waiting to see what Mother would say. Should they go on the train, or would they have to stay behind? And it was so scary to stay behind. Mom, what are we going to do? Well, said Mother, I don't know where Daddy is, but I have a feeling every time we move that we get further away from where Daddy probably is. And I'm afraid we'll never find him unless we stay put. So most of the people in the town got on the trains and they left. The dogs were howling. They could begin to hear the artillery shells, and they knew that that night the army would break into that town and overtake that town. Unless something happened, that the German soldiers again drove the Russian soldiers back away, but it didn't look like it. It looked like the German army was losing. So, Mommy told the children, children, it's very important tonight that nobody go upstairs. Nobody turn on a light, because the apartment building we're in is facing the war front. And if those Russian soldiers would happen to see a light in any of the buildings, chances are they would think there would be German soldiers in those buildings. So don't go upstairs, don't turn on a light, keep the shades drawn, and we'll wait and see what happens. The kids were all praying, all except baby George. And he got hungry. And he started to cry. And he cried and he cried and he cried. So finally, Christine and Yannick said, Mommy, please, let us go upstairs and get some milk for baby George. Well, said Mommy, be very careful and don't turn on any lights. Pull down the shade, don't turn on any lights, and go up and get some milk for baby George. So Christine took baby George, and they went up the stairs of the apartment house, around one landing and up the next landing, and up the next landing, and up the next landing, way to the very top where the refrigerator was that had the milk and the food for baby George. It was kind of scary because nobody was around, and everything was so quiet, and it was so dark they could hardly see. Yannick went right away over to the windows and pulled all the shades, and Christine pulled another shade, and they went to the refrigerator, opened the refrigerator, took out some milk, and they poured it into a little skillet, like a little pan, a little pot, a little saucepan. And Yannick noticed that it was so cold. If they could only warm it a little bit. And so he got an idea. He wouldn't turn on any lights or anything like that because Mommy had warned him. But he got an idea that maybe if he had just light a candle, then he could warm that milk up a little bit before giving it to baby George. So he struck a match, and he lit the candle, and he was standing there trying to warm the milk up for baby George. And suddenly there was a terrible explosion. The windows were just blown out. Yannick, baby George, and Christine were thrown to the ground with a blast that hit that building. Everything was shaking. And Yannick and Christine were scared to death, and baby George began to scream. And finally, after all the noise faded away, everything was still once again. Those kids got up so fast off the floor, grabbed baby George, forgot about the milk, and they went down those stairs faster than you can imagine, down all the way down to the bottom, and hid in the basement. The next day, they found out that the Russian army had seen the little candle light probably flickering in past the shade. They saw just enough light to figure somebody was there. So they aimed the gun and they shot. But the Polish people have a saying that man may shoot the bullet, but God can determine the destination. And somehow that big artillery shell, instead of hitting the apartment building where the children were and the family was, it went just barely over the top of that building and hit the apartment building next door and leveled it to the ground. That night, after that terrible explosion, the kids were very quiet. All except baby George. But they tried to keep him quiet too. And as they were waiting, wondering what was going to happen, when were the soldiers going to come into town, they could hear movement outside the window. They were in the basement, so it was right next to them. And they could hear that the German soldiers were right outside, and they were quickly trying to change clothes out of their uniforms and into civilian clothing. So if they got caught, they wouldn't get taken into anyway, they wouldn't be prisoners of war. They would hopefully be looked at as civilians. They were changing their clothes, and during the night, the Russian army, with some of the Polish people that were fighting with the Russian army to fight to get the Germans out of their country, they moved into town. Those terrible, awful, horrible, barbarian soldiers. But the next morning, when Jan got up, it was kind of exciting when you're only 8 or 9 years old. And all the doors of the stores were wide open. People had left, gotten on the train, knew they would probably never return. There was no system to deliver things from one area to another area, and all the doors were left open on all these stores. So the people that were left behind could go into a store, and if they needed some beans or some flour or some sugar or some things like that, they could just go help themselves until society got put back to order again, and they had people selling things and providing the stores with goods. And Jan remembers, that was so fun. That was so exciting to go into a store and knowing that now, let's see, the family, after all, I am the man of the family, maybe they need some beans or maybe they need some flour. And he would load everything up on a little wagon and take it back to the apartment house where his family was staying. Now, he did notice that there were once in a while somebody that didn't quite make it through the war as he went out into the outskirts of town. But he doesn't remember those gory things. He remembers how much fun it was to have all the stores open and to be able to take care of the family. After a number of days, they realized that the family needed fresh produce, things like milk and eggs and cheese and things like that. Well, Yannick decided to go and get himself a job at 9 years of age. You see, there were these Polish soldiers that had come to town with the Russian soldiers, and they noticed that there were a lot of German Fräuleins around. Do you know what that means? Young girls. And the Polish soldiers thought these were very good-looking girls. And they thought it would sure be nice if they could talk to these girls. But they all spoke Polish, and the girls all spoke German. Well, it so happened that Yannick spoke Polish, and he had gone to a German school for the last 4 years, and he also could speak German. So they had this little 9-year-old kid come over to translate so they could get introduced to the girls. And he would translate back and forth and back and forth, and until they got well enough acquainted that they didn't need Yannick. And for his services, they gave the family milk and eggs and cheese and things like that. And that's the way the family lived for a number of weeks. And then society began to be put back in order again, and stores opened, and Yannick's mother decided that she should start a business. Oh, she was such a good businesswoman. Her head could just figure out how to make money. Now, she was German by birth. She had married a Polish man, so she understood both the Polish people and the German people. And when the war front first, at the very beginning of the war, when the Germans overcame the Polish people, the Germans said if they wanted this, they said, "Thank you, I'm going to take it. We're the victors. You've lost the war." And they just took whatever they wanted. Now, the tables were turned. The German people wanted to leave that area because they were the losers. They wanted to go back toward Germany. And the Polish people said, "Wait a minute, you took things from us, now we will just take things from you." Well, Jan's mother, being German, but understanding the Polish people and really being Polish by citizenship and by marriage and citizenship, she decided that she would start a business. Why? She would buy things from the German people who wanted quickly to sell their things so they could leave. She would buy things for a pretty good price. Then she would mark them up a little bit, and she would sell them to the Polish people who wanted these things. And before you knew it, their house was filled with this apartment was filled with all kinds of things. I mean, there were beautiful tablecloths and silver and china and gorgeous clothes, and there were watches and all these gorgeous, beautiful things all over their house. And Jan's mother was making lots of money. And then, Then something happened. Late one afternoon, there was a knock on the door. Yannick's mother opened the door, and sure enough, it was the Incavo Day, the secret police from the Polish secret police. And they said, "We have come to search your house for 40 army coats. We heard you have stolen 40 army coats." "Oh, no," said Yannick's mother. "I haven't done anything like that." "Well, we heard that you did, so we have come with a search warrant to search your house." Well, Yannick's mother had heard so many terrible things about these soldiers, the secret police, that she allowed these two men to come in. And they looked all over, and they looked at everything. And she could tell they were surprised that there were so many things there. But she noticed that one of the soldiers kept looking at her wristwatch. She tried to hide it, but he kept looking. Finally, after they searched all over and, of course, didn't find any army coats, they left. Oh, everybody was so happy to see them go. The sun went down. It was bedtime. And Jan's mother heard a knock on the door. This time she was really frightened. She began to pray because she had a feeling who might be at the door. Before opening that door, she quickly took off her watch and she hid it because this was the special watch that her husband had given her for a wedding present. It was a very, very expensive watch. And she didn't even know where he was. She didn't know if he was alive or dead. And she didn't want to give up the only thing that she had left that really meant something to her from her husband. So she hid the watch. And then she put on another watch. And after a while, after everything was hidden and the new watch was on, she went to the door and she opened it. And it was that secret policeman who had noticed the watch. He pushed his way into the house as soon as she unlocked the door. And he immediately said, he was Russian, so he couldn't speak Polish. He was in the secret police, but he pointed to the watch. Now, she couldn't speak to him. She didn't know the language, but she knew what he wanted, the watch. So she took off the cheap watch that she had put on her arm, and she gave it to him. And he shook his head. He knew it wasn't the watch that he had seen before. And she said, well, maybe she could find another watch. She kind of motioned to him, so she went over and she found another watch and had him look at it. And he once more shook his head. Well, maybe this watch. And she gave him another watch. But he continued to shake his head. That wasn't the right watch. And he began to get angry. Now, they had heard all kinds of stories about what these soldiers might do if they wanted something. But Yannick's mother did not want to give up her watch. Finally, this soldier in desperation was so angry that he pulled out his revolver and he stuck it at Mom's head. And he made a motion once again that he wanted that watch. And tomorrow I will tell you what happened.
Welcomes you to part 3 of Lemonade, the escape from Poland. Once again, here is Dr. K. Kuzma to tell us about life after the war.
sounds like you're enjoying the story. And we're way up in the air with what's happening when I left. Oh, the revolver, you remember. The Russian secret policeman has just come in, and he was the one who had seen Mother's watch, the one that she had gotten from her husband. And now her husband, she didn't know where he was, and she didn't want to give up this watch, so she had hidden the watch. And now late at night, this Russian soldier comes back, and you know how terrible and awful stories had circulated about Russian soldiers. Well, this Russian soldier came back, and he kept pointing to her watch. And she took off the one watch, which wasn't the real one, because she had hidden the one that her husband had given her. And she went and got another watch, but he knew it wasn't the right watch, so he kept pointing to the watch again. And she got another watch, and another watch, and another watch. And soon he got so angry that she wasn't giving him the right watch that he pulled out his revolver and put it to her head, and he again motioned to the watch. He wanted the watch that he had seen earlier that afternoon. What should she do? It was the only thing she had from her husband, and she didn't know if she would ever see him again. It was an expensive watch. She didn't want to give up that special keepsake. But she knew that he just indeed might pull the trigger. So finally she decided she would have to give up that watch. And she shook her head yes, and went over to the hiding place where she had put that watch, and she gave it to the man. The man put away his revolver and left. And quickly she bolted the door, and she breathed a sigh of relief, and she prayed a prayer of thanksgiving that the man had gone. But the next day, she got word that she was going to have to leave town. But the next day, she got a special announcement from the city that said, "You are no longer welcome in our town. We will give you 3 days to leave. 3 days to pack your suitcases and be on the train, or else." "What do you mean?" she said. 3 days to leave this house? Just look, she said, at all the things we have now. Once before, when we lived in Plotzk, we had to leave everything, our whole house behind. And now I've been able to buy things from the German people who wanted to leave, and sell things to the Polish people, and have more money to buy more things. And look, we have such beautiful things now. I don't want to leave again. And then she got an idea. Why, she knew some city officials. If she would just talk to those city officials, then maybe they would let her stay. And she talked to this person and that person, and she was sure now that she would be able to stay. So she didn't even worry about it. That was silly, having to leave the city. But on the third day, a knock came to the door. Again, the Russian secret police. With the notice, "You have 2 hours to leave your home, to get out of here, and you can only take 2 suitcases per person." What? We have to leave in 2 hours? No way will I be able to get packed up. 2 suitcases per person, and you must be out of here in 2 hours. She realized that they meant business. She realized they wanted everything that she had there, because no way could she take it all with her. She began packing quickly. 2 suitcases per person. That meant they could take 10 suitcases, and that was it. She quickly packed, and when the 2 hours were up, they made sure that she left the house with her children. They ushered her to the railroad station and left her just standing right there on the railroad station. She had no idea where she would go, where the children would live now. And as they were standing there, and Mom went to try to get some tickets to just the next town, a man came up, saw Donna standing with the suitcases. She had one on each side of her. And the man came up, pushed Donna over, grabbed the 2 suitcases and ran. So by the time Mother got back, they were already down to 8 suitcases. And can you guess what were in the suitcases that this man stole? The most significant things that you could possibly imagine. All the children's clothing, all their underwear was in all these suitcases. So they got on the train having nothing to wear except what they had on. They got on the train, went to the next town, and got off in this strange town, not knowing anybody. And Mom began to knock on doors and to ask, are there any Seventh-day Adventists in this town? Because she knew if she could find somebody that went to the same church that her family went to, that certainly they would be able to find a place to live. But the town was overcrowded. There was no place to live. Finally, she went to this one home, and they had a lot of other people, 3 or 4 other families living in their house with them already. But they said, well, we do have a little corner down here in the basement that you could have to sleep in. Why, it was the middle of winter, and it was cold. And how long would your mother let you wear the same underwear before she needed to wash it? About 1 day? Well, this mother was a good mother, and she was not going to let her children wear dirty underwear. And of course, they didn't have anything else because the man had stolen the suitcases with all the underwear and all the clothing. So when the day came for Mother to wash, the kids had to go to bed and wait there until she washed the clothes, until the clothes were dried, and they didn't have dryers in those days. They just had to hang them up and wait for them to dry. And finally, after they were dried, then the kids could get up, get dressed, and play. Well, obviously, Mother decided that this was not really a good situation. And the kids hated to go to bed all day long or wear a blanket around them all day long with all those other people in the house. So Mother decided she was going to have to find a place for them to live. She went out every day, early in the morning, knocking on doors, looking for a place to live. She couldn't find anything. Day after day after day after day, she searched, and still she couldn't find a place for them to live. Then one night, she had a dream. And in her dream, she saw this house with a red gate. And when she saw this house with a red gate, she knew that was the house that God had for them to live in. She woke up the next morning and woke up the kids, and she said, kids, today I'm going to find the house that we're going to live in. You are, Mother? How do you know? You've been searching for a week or so, and you haven't been able to find anything. Well, she said, I know. God told me last night that it's going to be a lovely house. In fact, it's going to be a house with a red gate. It is? Yes, said Mother. I'm going to go out really early today, and by nighttime, I will have found the place that we're going to live. You keep praying for me, she said as she left. Well, all day long, Mom searched up one street, down another street, over to the next street, down that street, around the corner, looking for this house that she had seen in her dreams. She forgot to eat lunch, into the afternoon, up one street, down another street, up this street, down that, around the corner, still searching for that house. The sun was beginning to go down. And she kept praying, Lord, I know you have a house for us. And just as she was almost ready to give up, She turned a corner, and there was a vacant lot, and she looked across the vacant lot, and there was a house with a red gate. She ran across that vacant lot, up to the house, opened the gate, ran in, up to the door, knocked on the door, and this German couple opened the door. And she said, "Hi, my name is Elizabeth Kuzma, and I was wondering, could I live with my 4 children in your house?" How would you feel if someone came up to your house and said, "Excuse me, please, could I live with my 4 children in your house?" Wouldn't you think that rather strange? Well, this German couple said, "Isn't it amazing that you have come to us? Why, we were just talking about trying to find our sons. We have 2 sons that have been lost in the war. We don't know where they are right now. And we were thinking that we should probably leave our house and go search for them, to try to find them. And it would be wonderful to have you stay in our house while we're gone." And so that very next day, Mommy and her 4 children moved into this beautiful house. And this German couple had left everything behind. So they had everything they needed. And Yannick, for the first time in his life, had a dog to play with. Oh, and this was such a smart German Shepherd dog. But one time, about at Christmas time, this dog was just sniffing around in some bushes and kind of backed out of the bushes and had a $10 bill in his mouth. Yannick thought this dog was a pretty smart dog to go find money for him and to bring it back. They had a wonderful time in that house. But all the time, as Mommy started her business, selling things to the Polish people that needed it, and buying things from the German people who wanted to get rid of their things, Mommy, all the time they started this business and they were making lots of money, and the shelves started loading up with beautiful silver and china and all those lovely things. All the time they worried about, will they be asked to leave again? Will they be forced out of their home again? Will the secret policeman come again to Yankavo Day and take everything they have? Day after day, they worried about this, and they prayed for the Lord's protection. And then, late one afternoon, they received an interesting visit. It was someone from church. What happened was the Polish minister from their church had gone to a camp meeting. And while he was at camp meeting, he met a lady who said to him, do you know where the Kuzma family is? Do you know where Elizabeth and the children might be? Yes, he said. They're in my church. Oh, really? She said. I have wonderful news for them. I heard on the Red Cross radio broadcast that William Kuzma is alive. Really? Said the pastor. Where is he? He's in Germany. And apparently what they were trying to do after the war is to try to get families back together. And because they had been separated, the people who were trying to find each other called into the Red Cross, and hour after hour on the Red Cross broadcast, they would say something like, William Kuzma in Germany, and the place in Germany where he was, looking for his wife and 4 children, Elizabeth and 4 children, last seen in Płock, Poland. Anybody knowing their whereabouts, please contact Red Cross station number 406. Well, quickly, when that lady heard that broadcast that William Kuzma was looking for Elizabeth, she quickly wrote it down because she had known them before. And she wrote down that information, and now at camp meeting she was trying to find somebody who knew where Elizabeth Kuzma was. And it's a good thing that Elizabeth and her 4 children were going to church and knew that pastor, because pretty soon that pastor came home from camp meeting, came right over to Elizabeth's house and said, "I have wonderful news. Your husband is alive and he's wanting to find you. He's in Germany." And the family was so excited. So they began writing back and forth. Now the interesting thing is, before William Kuzma got his wife's letter, he had a dream. He had a dream that there was a large evergreen tree. And flying around this evergreen tree were 5 white geese. And the white geese were flying around the tree and then settled on the evergreen branches. And he thought that was such an interesting that he went to one of his friends who was also who was there in the camp in Germany. And he said, "What does that dream mean?" The pastor said, "Well, it means that you will hear that the 5 members of your family," and that he got the that came station that she and the 5 were all alive. He was so excited. "You've got to bring and escape from Poland and come into Germany where I am." Well, she got that letter and she wrote back to him and she said, "Where are you living?" And he said, "Well, I'm living in a displaced persons camp." "Well, what kind of a home is that?" "Well, it's not really a home. It's just a camp until we can find a place to live. Until we can go to America." He had a dream and wanted to come to America. "Well," said Elizabeth, "I live in a beautiful home with a red gate. You come to Poland." "Oh, no," he said. "I don't want to go back into Poland. There's no freedom there. Here there's freedom. I want to go to America and give my children a chance to have the education they deserve, to have the religious freedom they deserve." Well, Elizabeth wrote back and said, "Wait a minute. What kind of money are you making?" And he said, "I'm not making any money." But Elizabeth said, "I'm making lots of money. You come to Poland." "No," said William. "You come to Germany." And all this time, Elizabeth was making a lot of money. Beautiful things on the shelf. She was doing very well. She was such a sharp businesswoman. And then one day it happened. There was a knock on the door. And tomorrow I will tell you who was at the door.
Lemonade, the escape from Poland. This is part 4, and here is Dr. K. Kuzma to tell us about the plans to escape.
Remember that Mom was writing back and forth to Dad. They found out that Daddy was alive. Daddy was where now? Daddy was at a displaced persons camp, a camp where people that didn't have a home, that were displaced from their real home, were staying until they could get permanent location. And Daddy had a dream. The dream was to go to America. And he kept writing back to Mommy, and Mommy said what? No, come back to Poland, because she had plenty of money and she had a nice home to live in. And what did Yannick's father keep writing back? No, you come to Germany. So the story begins tonight, knowing that there's the secret policeman always around and you're never quite safe. The story begins tonight with a knock on the window. And everybody kind of wonders, what is it this time? Remember the last time this happened and the secret policeman was there? They had to leave their home. Was it going to happen again? Yannick looked out the window, and there he saw somebody that he recognized. Why, it was a lady he used to know way back, and an old friend of the family. And so they opened the door, and she came in, and she had an incredible story. She said that Daddy got tired of riding back and forth, and you wouldn't come to Germany, and so he hired me to come and get in fact, about 4 different families hired this lady to come and get all the families together and help them escape across the border. I mean, this lady was an escape artist, if there ever was an escape artist. She was in Germany. Then she heard that her husband was back in Poland. So she went back over the border into Poland. She searched around for him, and then she heard that he was back in Germany. So she had to escape back into Germany. She just couldn't go legally back into Germany, so she knew how to do it. This is how you do it if you need to escape across the border. In case you need to escape across the border, you'll all know now. You just get in a great big hay wagon full of hay, but you make sure there's a false bottom in the hay wagon. So when you hit the border and the officials take the big pitchforks and go down through the hay like this to make sure that there's nobody hiding in the hay, you don't get hit because you're lying there in the bottom of the hay wagon with boards over the top of you. She said it's easy to go across the border. Well, Yannick's mother didn't know quite what to say. Here was this lady that they used to know. They trusted her. And here she came with a special letter from her husband. Please come with this lady. Trust her. She knows how to get back and forth across the border. She will help you. Please come. Well, this lady knew that if she could just bring something very special to the children, that they would want to go to America. Now, if you wanted to have someone come out of Poland and risk their lives escaping, what would you take them to make them want to go over the border? Well, a Porsche. Well, that probably would do it. Well, this lady thought and thought, and finally she decided, I know what will do it. And so she had a knapsack with her, and she took off her knapsack, and she opened it up, and she had peanuts in there. The kids from Poland had never tasted peanuts. Oh, and they tasted them, and they tasted so delicious. They were so wonderful. And then, to top it all off, she had some soda crackers. And they tasted these soda crackers. They had never tasted soda crackers before. And they tasted them, and they thought it was manna from America. They thought it was wonderful. They had never tasted anything so delicious. And the kids were saying, Mom, please, let's go, let's go. Daddy wants to take us to America. Let's escape, let's go. Well, Mom thought about it a little bit. She looked around at all those things she had and finally decided, okay, we'll go. So the lady wrote down a date. And at this special time, on this date, they were supposed to come to the border town, to the train station, and meet her there. And together with 3 or 4 other families, she would help all these women and all these children whose daddies were down in Germany. She would help them all escape. But they were to be there at a certain time, a certain place. She said, will you be there? And Mommy said, okay, we will be there. The lady went away to find the other families, and Mommy began selling all the things that she had, getting rid of it, because she couldn't take it all with her. But she planned to take the cash with her. I mean, she had lost so many times. Lost that first house back in Putsk where they had lived for such a nice long time. She lost everything there. And then the second house where she had so many things and the Encavo Day came and forced her to just take a few suitcases, why, she lost everything again. And she wasn't about to lose the third time. She was going to plan very carefully. So she turned it all into cash. Now, how do you carry around $10,000 if you got it all in cash? I don't know exactly what the amount of money was, but it was a large amount of money. Well, she figured that Yannick would be the safest person to put it on. Who would bother a little boy? Now, they might search her. So what she did is that she first had him get dressed in something like a Pathfinder suit, a Boy Scout outfit that had lots of pockets in it. And so he stuffed all those pockets with all this money. And then, over the top of that, she put another suit of clothing. And over the top of that, a big jacket and a few coins in his pocket. And that's the way they traveled when they left that house with the red gate and took the train into Stettin, that border town. That's how they traveled with all the money on Yannick. I mean, he was loaded. That special date came, and they went into town on the train and got off the train at the train station, and there was the lady waving at them. And oh, they were good. They were so happy that she was there because they had no idea how to escape over the border. And they had their suitcases, and George was in his baby buggy, and everything was ready. And then they saw, oh, there's another family that had gathered, and another family, and Mommy and the kids knew some of them from way back when they were in Putz. They knew some of these families, and now they were coming together, and it was so exciting. All the mommies had to do now was to find a place for all these mommies and all these children to live until they could figure out how they could escape over the border. So they were kind of standing around the train station, and they were discussing, well, how are we going to find a place to live? Well, one mommy went off in this direction, one mommy went off in that direction, another mommy went off in this direction to try to find a place to stay for a few days so they could figure out how they could escape. And then they would all come back to the train station to try to figure out, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't find a place. Oh, I didn't find a place either. I didn't find a place either. Because everybody was crowded into this border town. Because all the people who were German, who had gotten caught in Poland, were trying to get across the border. Now, what happened after the war? Poland used to be right here. But after the war, the Russians said, well, we're going to take part of Poland, the part that has the oil and all the other good mineral resources. We'll just take this part of Poland. Well, that made Poland that big. That was no fair. And because Germany lost the war, they said, well, we'll just move Poland's border down here. So instead of Poland being here, Poland was now down here, which meant when they moved the border, a lot of people who thought they were safe in Germany suddenly got caught behind the communist border. They were back in Poland because they just moved the border. So they all wanted to leave Poland. Now, if you were German and you had German papers to prove it, you could leave Poland legally. You just presented your German papers, and if they saw that they were legitimate, they were legal, they would just sign a form for you, and you could go in to a special camp. And in that camp, once a week, a train would come and pick up all the people that had been processed and were legally German. They knew they were Germans, and the train would come and pick them up and take them on into Germany. Well, Mommy looked at all those people, and she kind of remembered that, but they still had to figure out what they were going to do, and they were, of course, all Polish. They were all standing there late in the day after searching all over town for a place to stay and couldn't find a place. A railroad official, a Polish railroad official, came up to them and said, I know you're trying to escape. Come with me. Oh, no. I mean, if they said they were going to escape and they were caught by an official of the government, they could be sent to Siberia. Oh, no, we're not trying to escape. I know you are trying to escape. Come with me. I have a place for you to stay. No, we're finding a place to stay. Just wait. Some of the mommies have gone off to find a place to stay. We'll have a place to stay tonight. Don't worry about us. Well, about an hour later, another mom came back, and another mom came back. No place to stay in that whole town. So once again, that Polish railroad official came up to all those women and the children and all their baggage, and he said, I know you are trying to escape. Please come with me. I have a place for you to stay. No, we're not trying to escape. We'll find a place. And this Polish railroad official got so frustrated with all those women that finally he grabbed the baby buggy with baby George in it, and he started to run away with baby George in the baby buggy. Guess what all those mothers and children did? They ran after the railroad official who was running away with baby George. And they ran across town, and he led them to a long barrack-like building. And he told them they could stay here for as long as they needed to stay here until they figured out a way to escape. Oh, we're not going to escape. No, not us. But they had no place else to stay. They went into this long barrack-like building, and there were lots of beds. Lots of beds all lined up, one next to the other, all lined up. They brought in all their things. And the kids were always kind of curious, when you get to a new place. I don't know if you ever do this, when you get to a motel and you kind of look around and open things up and pull the drawers open to hopefully somebody has left a $100 bill in one of those drawers, and you kind of look under everything and search under the bed. Suddenly, Yannick, as he was looking under the bed, stopped. There was a great big long axe under the bed. Then they looked under the next bed, and there was another axe under the bed. And under the next bed, there was another. All the beds had axes under them. Well, they had never seen anything like this. It was kind of scary to be in a place where they had axes under all the beds. But that night, they went to sleep. And the next morning, the lady who had come to help them escape out of Poland said, well, I'm going now to arrange for a big hay wagon so that we can all get at the bottom of the hay wagon. Then they'll put the boards on top of us. Then they'll put the hay on top of that. So when we get to the border and the officials take the big pitchforks, put it down through the hay, it won't hit any of us, and we'll just go on through the border. Wait a minute, said Mom. Let's see. 5 moms, 5 women, and 16 kids in a hay wagon? Can you imagine 16 kids in the bottom of a hay wagon? Somebody's going to sneeze. What if they would sneeze when we were going through the border? And then they would find us. Why? If they would find us trying to escape, they would send us to Siberia. We can't take that chance. Well, said the lady, what else are we going to do? We can't get across the border. There's barbed wire, there's searchlights, there's a spot that's called a no man's land where the grass you can't even, crawl across because the grass has all been mowed. They'll find us. 5 women and 16 kids coming across the border. They'll know. We have to figure out a better way of escaping. Mommy started to pray. And she got an interesting idea. she was German by birth. And she remembered all the German people who had been displaced that were in Poland when the border changed. Why, they were getting to go to Germany legally if they had papers. Well, a lot of people had lost their papers during the war. And if you had lost your papers during the war, as you were forced out of your home, you could go to a special office and apply to get new papers. Because she was German, she felt she had a right to those papers. Now, technically, she was Polish because she had married a Polish man. She had a Polish marriage certificate, and she had a Polish birth certificate for each one of the kids, and she had all the Polish school records. And she figured she didn't want to get rid of those because they were important papers. But she thought that maybe if she did it right, she could get German papers for the whole family. And maybe she could get them for all 4 families. So she took some of that money out of Yannick's pocket and she started rolling up $100 bills. And she put it in a cigarette case, really nice cigarette case. And she prayed, and she went up to the official at the window that was the official that was responsible for getting papers for people who had lost their German papers. And she said to the man, "Sir, I am German." And she spoke beautiful German. "I am German. I don't have any papers. I need papers for myself and my 4 children. And I need papers for 4 other mothers and all their children. Can you get me papers?" And the man, he looked at her and he shook his head. "Oh, I'm sorry, I don't think I can." "Please," she said, "we need papers. Our husbands are all over in Germany waiting for us. We must have these papers." And at the same time, she handed him the box of, quote, cigarettes. He opened the box and saw how peculiar these cigarettes looked. And he shut the box and he said, "Well, maybe I could arrange to get some papers for you." So in another day or so, she had papers for everyone in their whole party. But the interesting thing is that one lady didn't speak any German. Now, if you were going through a border to be searched to make sure you were German and you had all your papers in order and you didn't speak any German at all, what would you do? Now, you got to go through the border. You can't hide. She played as if she were deaf and dumb. She had her papers, and she walked through as if she couldn't hear or she couldn't talk. And she walked right through. And all the other mothers walked right through. Now, it was illegal to take money over the border. They didn't want you to take any money out of Poland if you were going into Germany. They hated the Germans for what the Germans had done to them during the war, and they didn't want any of their money to go over there. Well, Mother thought about that. You know, it really wasn't fair. She had already lost 2 times. Daddy didn't have any money at all. It would certainly come in handy. So she said, "I think I'll try to take some money." So there was Yannick with his Pathfinder outfit filled with money and a few coins in his pocket, his black satchel on his back, and in that black satchel was something extremely important. Another thing she did not want to leave behind were all those Polish papers that really proved they were Polish citizens at this moment in history. Before the war, you could be Polish and German. After the war, you had to be one or the other. And she had married a Polish man. But she didn't want to get rid of the birth certificates and all those certificates, so she very carefully opened a school book. And she put the papers in between the pages of the school book, closed the school book, and put it in the black satchel, the school knapsack that Yannick used to take to school. It was a leather knapsack. It had beautiful gold buckles, and you could lock it. So she put the book in there with a number of other books, and Yannick went through the border, and the man said, "Do you have any money?" And he pulled out his pockets and emptied a few coins there, and the man took them, and he ushered Yannick all through with all that money and all those Polish papers on him. They showed them where they could stay in this little apartment. It had a cement floor like this and just a couple cots for them to sleep in. And they put all their things over by the wall. Oh, they were so pleased to be there. Now all they had to remember is to keep speaking German. Just keep speaking German. So nobody would find out. Keep speaking German. Well, that was easy until you got angry at somebody. And when you get angry at somebody and need to argue, it's very hard to argue in a second language when you're not really very fluent in that language. So suddenly the kids would get angry and they would start to argue in Polish. And then they would remember and try to change to German. And a couple times they almost got caught. One afternoon, a knock came to the door of their apartment. Another knock. And again, it was a secret policeman, one of the officials of that camp. And he said, "We have found some silver in the apartment under you, and we saw you talking to those people, so we are going to search all the things that you brought here to see if there's any silver at all." "Oh no," said Mommy, "we don't have any silver." She didn't tell him that she had money or those Polish papers, but she said, "We don't have any silver." Well, they said, "We have to search." The man forced his way into their room, went over to the big pile of suitcases and all the boxes they had, made the family stand over here to the side, and he began searching through those boxes. Box after box he opened, he looked through to make sure there was nothing that shouldn't be there, and then he put the box over on the other pile, and all the time he was getting closer to the black satchel that was lying right in the middle of the pile. All the children knew what was in that black satchel. They knew that if he would look in that black satchel and find those papers, instead of going to Germany, it would be Siberia. So they began to pray, like they'd never prayed before, that the man would not find those papers. He looked through one box, then another box, and the closer he got, the more nervous the family got. And finally, they were able to catch Christine's eye. She was standing the closest to where the black satchel was. And the family kind of got her eye and motioned. And she caught on that they wanted her to pick up the black satchel. And while the official wasn't looking, to put it over on the other pile of everything that had been searched. So she waited. And she waited till just the right time. And it's really hard when you're 10, to do everything right. And she waited. And finally, he kind of turned the other way a little bit. And she quickly reached over, picked up the black satchel. And just as she was ready to put it on the other pile, he started to turn around, and she dropped the black satchel, and it fell over, and the clasp hit the cement floor and made a noise, and the man turned around and yelled, "I told you not to move! What did you do?" Well, they played deaf and dumb. They did not answer. He said, "Tell me what happened. I know something happened." He knew something had happened. But the family wouldn't answer. He looked back at the pile. He couldn't figure out what was wrong. So he continued searching through all the boxes. And finally, after he got to the very end, and had everything over on the pile of all the search things, he stood up and he looked around at the family and he said, "I think I missed something. I'm going to have to search through these things again." This time, he put the family over on the other side of the room where they couldn't possibly touch anything on the pile. And once more, he began searching through those boxes. This time, everything was out and open. You could tell he had looked through it once before. And this family prayed like they had never prayed before. He got closer and closer to the black satchel, and at last he picked it up. And he looked at it in a rather strange way, and he looked over at the family, and tomorrow I will tell you what happened.
Lemonade, the escape from Poland. Welcome to part 5, entitled From Sour to Sweet. And here is Dr. K. Kuzma.
We start the story today about just at the time when the secret policeman was looking through or the secret official, whatever he was looking through all the boxes that Mommy and Aunt Donna and Christine and Yannick and baby George had. And he was looking through everything to try to find if there was any silver hidden. And he finally got to what? The black satchel. And he picked it up, and he shook the black satchel, and the children knew that if he would look in the black satchel, open the book of the black satchel, what would he find? All the special papers that were the Polish birth certificates and marriage certificates and all the school records of the children from Poland that would prove their Polish citizenship. And they didn't want to find that because they were going through this special camp on Mom's citizenship because she was German. So they were in the camp, and he was holding the black satchel. Everything else was open, but the black satchel was closed completely, locked up. And this man, who was a very intelligent man, whom the government had hired to search and find things that people shouldn't have, he lifted up this black satchel, shook it, looked around, kind of with a funny look on his face, looked at the black satchel again, and said, "I looked at this, didn't I?" And he threw it over on the other pile. Oh! Now this was an answer to prayer. It says in Psalms 50:15, "Trust me in your time of trouble, so I can rescue you and you can give me glory." Remember when Christine was standing there and she moved the black satchel all by herself? They were praying, but she tried to help herself, didn't she? And what happened? It made a noise, and the man started to search again. But this time, no way could the family help themselves. They were desperate. They really needed a miracle now, and God performed a miracle. Remember Psalms? Do you remember where it says? Psalms 50:15. Can you say it all with me? Psalms 50:15. Look it up when you get home. It says, "Trust me in your times of trouble, so I can rescue you, and then you can give me glory." Because we didn't do it on our own. We were at the bottom. We had no resources. Well, the man searched through everything else then, and he left. Oh, the family was so happy. He had finally gone. The next day came, and the next day, and the children tried to remember not to argue in Polish. And that one lady walked around camp all this time because she didn't know any German, playing that she was deaf and dumb. Oh, when would they schedule the train to come and take them on down to Germany into freedom and safety so they could be with their father? Finally, they announced that the train would be coming on a certain day. They packed up early in the morning, and now it was such a hot, blistery, summery day. They packed up everything, and they took it all out to the siding beside the railroad track. There wasn't a station there or anything, just a siding where they put all of their boxes to get ready for the train. The train pulled in, and then it didn't go anyplace. It just waited. And everybody was walking out around in the heat, and everybody was saying, when is the train going to go? When are they going to let us on the train? When are we going to leave? And they said, oh, it's not going to be for hours yet. Not for hours yet. Well, Yannick was so thirsty. And he began to feel his pockets. Do you remember what he had on? That Pathfinder suit, all filled with, or that suit with lots of pockets at least, all filled with money. And on top of that, another suit of clothes. And on top of that, another jacket. I mean, he was hot. And he remembered all that money. And he said, Mommy, I am so thirsty, and there's nothing to drink here. And baby George is crying, he's thirsty. And Donna's thirsty, and Christine's thirsty. Mommy, I can see town right over there. And since the train isn't going to be leaving for hours, Mom, can't I take a bucket and go and get some lemonade? Oh, said his mom, I don't know if that's such a good idea or not. Please, said Yannick. Please, it's the last time I'll ever be in Poland. Let me go and see if I can get some lemonade. Well, Mommy was not quite sure about this, but she went up to where the train officials were, and she asked, what time will the train be leaving? And the railroad officials said, well, probably about noon. Oh, that was 2 or 3 hours yet. Plenty of time. So she came back, gave Yannick a bucket, and said, okay, run and get us some lemonade. So he headed off with a bucket in his hand, off to town that he could see in the distance. This was the last time he'd ever be in a Polish town, and he was so excited. Here he was going to town all by himself to get this lemonade. I mean, he was really a big kid here, and he headed off to town, and when he finally got to town, he was walking through town, and he began to notice all the things in the windows. And then he remembered all this money on him. I mean, talk about being loaded. He was loaded. And he thought, oh, you know what I would really like? I would like to buy something, a souvenir from my last time in Poland. And he started to look through all the windows of all the shops. And he went into a shop and he looked around. Oh, he couldn't decide what he wanted. And then he went out of that shop and into another shop, trying to figure out what he wanted. And then he saw it. There in a glass case, a beautiful little pair of binoculars, opera glasses. And he asked the man to let him see them. And oh, they were so fancy he could wind it out and see way far away and then turn it around the other way and see real close. And you know, oh, he was having so much fun with that. And finally asked the man, how much are they? And the man told him, and he dug in underneath all those pockets. And he got out a wad of bills and he pulled them out and he counted it out for the man. And the man gave him the opera glasses. And he was so excited. He came out of the store, and he almost forgot what he was there for. The lemonade! Of course, the lemonade! And so he grabbed the bucket, and then he went to try to find the lemonade stand so that he could get some lemonade for the family. He finally located the lemonade stand. They filled up the bucket, and he decided it was probably about time to head back to the train. In fact, he kind of looked up in the sky, and he said, "Ooh, the sun looks like it's almost overhead. It must be about noon. Maybe I better kind of hurry along here." So he was walking along at a pretty nice clip, but he wasn't in that big of a hurry. And finally, he came over the last hill. And as he came over the last hill, he looked down to where the train should be, and the train was beginning to move. Yannick couldn't believe it. He started running like he had never run in his life, screaming at the top of his lungs, "Wait for me, I'm coming!" And the train started moving, and he could see his mother standing close to the engine of the train, screaming at the train dispatcher, "Stop the train, my son is coming, stop the train." Yannick couldn't believe it. He started running like he had never run in his life, screaming at the top of his lungs, "Wait for me, I'm coming!" And the train started moving, and he could see his mother standing close to the engine of the train, screaming at the train dispatcher, "Stop the train, my son is coming, stop the train." And he ran like he had never ran before, and when he came up to the train started to stop. But the scary thing was that the train dispatcher was the very same railroad official that met them in town and said to all those women and children, "I know you want to escape. Come with me and I'll show you a place to stay." And they were so afraid that he would report them. Now he knew this family. He recognized that mother. He recognized Yannick running down the hill. He knew what they were doing. He could have turned them in, but instead he flagged down the train, he waved down the train, stopped the train, and Yannick and his mommy got on the train. There wasn't much lemonade in the bucket when he finally got on the train. In fact, nobody even talked about lemonade when they got on the bucket, or when they got on the train. I don't even know if he got on the train with a bucket. What do you think that mommy talked about when they got on the train? Yannick remembers what happened. He sat right next to the window, and he glued his nose to the window, and he watched the telephone poles go by faster and faster and faster and faster and faster and faster, and he didn't look anyplace else. But that didn't keep his mommy from saying a few words. What do you think that mommy said? "What took you so long? Yannick, where have you been? How come you didn't come straight back?" And she told him that for 20 minutes she had waited. They were going to leave 20 minutes earlier. For 20 minutes she held up that train saying, "You can't leave. My son is going to be here shortly. You cannot leave." Finally, after 20 minutes, she could hold up the train no longer, and they said it had to go. Suddenly, this mother had to make a decision. What should she do? Here she was trying to escape from Poland. Her son wasn't there. There was Christine and Donna, maybe 11 and 13, 12 and 14 years of age, just young kids, and baby George. She finally decided, instead of leaving Yannick behind all by himself, that she would send the two girls and baby brother George on to Germany. Hopefully their daddy would find them. Hopefully he would be there when they got off the train. She would send them on, and she would wait behind for Yannick. She would give up her chance for freedom for her son. That's love, don't you think? And you know, the beautiful thing is that God loves us so much Jesus gave His own life for us so we could live forever. Doesn't that make you feel loved? Well, the train went on down to Germany. Daddy was there with a horse and buggy, actually. It was a really big occasion, and he got a horse and buggy, met his family, and the kids were so excited. And then they went to the German camp, the displaced persons camp, waiting to get to America. They wanted to come to America, to the United States. And they prayed and they waited and they went through health checks. And finally, after 4 years, they were able to come to the United States. Now, the interesting thing, during these 4 years in Germany, there wasn't too much to do in camp. And so Yannick would play soccer. Oh, and it was fun to play soccer, but he hated school. And every day when he went to school, he never had his lessons done. So the teacher would spank him. And when they got home, his sister, who was in the same grade, told Mom and Dad that Yannick got a spanking at school, so he got another spanking at home. And sometimes Yannick was a little mischievous and did some other things that perhaps he shouldn't have done. And in that school, they would draw a circle up on the blackboard and make Yannick kneel on pebbles. He wore those lederhosen, they're called, those shorts. And he would make him kneel on some pebbles on the ground with his hands in a circle way above his head. And when his hands got tired and started to come down, everybody in class would say, "His hands are coming down!" And up they would go again. Or else he would get it again. But when this kid, who never did well in school at all, didn't even like school, but boy, he loved soccer, when he came to the United States on a big ship, sailing into New Orleans, he got off that ship, and with thousands of people around, he went up to a rather stout gentleman and his wife, and he said, "Mr. Jensen?" And the man nodded his head. He found the people that were there who had offered them a place on their farm. And they went out to Texas to work for a whole year, hoeing cotton, picking cotton, and hoeing in the watermelon patch. And when Yannick spent a whole year picking cotton for 30 cents an hour, you know what Yannick decided he was going to do? He didn't really want to pick cotton for the rest of his life. He decided he was going to study and get good grades. And he found that he could get better grades in English than the kids who grew up knowing the language. And he started studying, went to Andrews University, graduated from Andrews University, came to Loma Linda University. I know you're not interested in this, but when he came to Loma Linda, he met me. And that was the best thing he'd ever done. And we got married, and we had Kim, Kari, and Kevin. You know, we can learn something when we look back at our families. God really has us in His hands in a special way. And if we'll just reach out and talk to Him and put our faith in Him, why, anytime you get in trouble, and it's easy to get in trouble, isn't it? You can remember, what verse are you going to remember? What verse? Psalms 50:15. Trust me in your time of trouble. So what? So what was God going to do? Trust me in your time of trouble so I can rescue you and you can give me the glory. Kimberly, when she was starting to write the story down, decided to call it Lemonade. Because the story ends with lemonade, even though it may have begun with a sour experience. And that's the way the Lord wants to make our lives. He wants to take the sour experiences and add the sugar of His Holy Spirit and His love and turn your lives from lemons into lemonade. God bless.